So, as you can see, this first lesson is not from the Bible. And so I'm just going to read it as it is. Contemplating the lace-like fabric of streams outspread over the mountains, we are reminded that everything is flowing, going somewhere. Animals and so-called lifeless rocks, as well as water. Thus, the snow flows fast or slow in grand beauty, making glaciers and avalanches. The air in majestic floods, carrying minerals, plant leaves, seeds, spores, with streams of music and fragrance. Water streams carrying rocks both in solution and in the form of mud particles, sand, pebbles, and boulders. Rocks flow from volcanoes like water from springs, and animals flock together and flow in currents modified by stepping, leaping, gliding, flying, swimming, etc. While the stars go streaming through the space, pulsed on and on, forever, like blood globules in nature's warm heart. So as I was reading this, and generally when I do my introductions, I look at what previously has come before to get an idea of where I'm going. I can't do that today. There is no previous Genesis 1:1. So I'm just going to read the second reading. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness God called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day.
In the beginning, Sky Woman fell from a hole in the sky world. She fell for what seemed like eternity. Eventually, she saw that the world below was covered by oceans. In the beginning, there was sky above and water below. Obatala climbed down from the sky on a golden chain and spread the sand he carried to create the earth. In the beginning, when God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Creation stories from around the world are diverse and have great variation, but there is one motif that is almost universally common across many dispersed ancient cultures: the primeval waters. From the stories of the indigenous people who lived around the Great Lakes of North America, to the Yoruba people on the west coast of Africa, to our own Judeo-Christian tradition from the Mediterranean, our origin stories tell of a world that began in water. Not every creation story begins with a watery world, but so many of them do that folklorists and mythologists call the common image of a watery creation the cosmic ocean. In the beginning, there was water. I know that some of us get uncomfortable when we read the origin stories that are told in the very beginning of Genesis. I think there's a variety of reasons for this. One reason that I have is that there are many people out there, people I know, people in my family, who believe that in order to be a good Christian, one must believe that the Bible is factual. They believe that the origin stories told in the book of Genesis must have actually happened that way. This sets up a condition of cognitive dissonance when between one's faith on the one hand and the teachings of science on the other. Many of us who've been educated in science are not willing to live with that cognitive dissonance. And so many progressive Christians feel that we must end up dismissing our faith tradition's origin stories as quaint ancient tales of a naive people who didn't understand anything about how the world really works. But I think this dismissiveness does a disservice to our sacred texts. They are preserved by our ancestors for a reason. And if we're willing to separate what is true from what is factual, we need not experience the cognitive dissonance, and we need not dismiss the stories altogether or treat them as unimportant or as having nothing to say about our spiritual lives and our relationship with our Creator. I do not believe that the Bible is a book of science. I do not believe that it contains facts as we understand them in science, something that can be proven by the scientific method or by exploration or experiment. But I do believe that the Bible contains truth. And by that, I mean stories that are not necessarily factual, but that are true, because they offer spiritual knowledge. They offer us a deeper understanding of our relationship with each other, and they offer a deeper understanding of our relationship with God. With thanks to Cindy Sojourner, who came up with this list at our Bible study this last week, here are some things that I think are true about the creation story in Genesis. And I'm going to put the passage up here again. This time from the Message translation, which I love for its exuberance and poetry. First of all, God created. I don't understand necessarily how it happened. I don't understand exactly how the divine spark initiated the creation of the universe, but the truth we receive from the stories in Genesis is that God is a creator, a creative God. Secondly, creation is messy. It's full of chaos, but it's also full of beauty. Another truth that we see in the beginning of Genesis is that God creates movement. One sense of movement is from not seeing to seeing. There was darkness, and now there is light. In the act of creation, God brings illumination into the world. Another aspect of the movement that God creates in this passage is the movement from taking chaos, a disorganized nothing, a soup of nothingness, as the Message puts it, and creating from it order and substance. The truth here is that God makes a way out of no way. God organizes the chaos so that we can find our way through it. Finally, the creation stories of Genesis set up a truth that exists throughout the entire Bible, the truth that our relationship with the divine is intricately connected with creation, with the wilderness, with nature, with a capital N. In these first few lines from the Hebrew Bible, we see how that intricate connection begins with our connection to water. The creation story, where God separates the heavens from the sea and raises land from the waters, is followed by other stories of water. In another story from Genesis, the powerful floodwaters wash away the sins of humanity, and through Noah, humanity has a chance to renew itself. In Exodus, the Israelites escaped slavery by passing through the waters of the Red Sea. In the story from 2 Kings, the general Naaman, with the help of the prophet Elisha, is freed from a debilitating skin disease through the cleansing waters of the Jordan River. These stories of the Hebrew Bible show the importance of water ritual to this ancient culture. Before there was Christian baptism, there was Jewish tevilah, or total immersion in water as an act of purification. The tevilah was required in many different ritual circumstances, before marriage or after returning from war, for example, and as part of the ritual for conversion to the Jewish faith. With a culture so steeped in stories and ritual practice with water, it's really no surprise to come to the beginning of the New Testament and find the prophet John the Baptist standing in the sacred river and ritually immersing or pouring water over those who wish to repent and receive new life. And it's no surprise that this ritual became a core practice of those who followed Jesus. Of the two primary sacred rituals mentioned in the New Testament, baptism and communion, baptism is the only one that appears in all four Gospels and is mentioned more times throughout the New Testament than the ritual of the Eucharist. It's apparent that it was very early on in the way of both it was very early on the way that both Gentiles and Jews were initiated into the path as followers of Jesus. And in the early years of Christianity, the ritual of baptism happened the way it's described in the Gospels, out in the wilderness, in flowing, living water. One of the things that's happened in the intervening 2,000 years is that we've domesticated baptism. Rather than engaging in baptism the way our Christian ancestors did, by being immersed in living, flowing water in the wilderness, we've brought baptism into the human-built environment. And now we sprinkle a little bit of water on a person's head, careful not to get them too wet or get the floor wet. And because of this domestication, we're missing one of the most important points of baptism. Jesus' immersion into water is not only a ritual that initiates him into a new relationship with God and into a new ministry with God's people, it also initiates him into a relationship with the wild river and into intimate, vulnerable union with the living world. I recently learned about a grammatical nuance in the baptism story as it's told in the Gospel, according to Mark. Bear with me here, because I'm going to get kind of nerdy about Bible translation. This is how the grammatical and grammar, so two things I love, right? This is how the grammatical nuance is described by Victoria Lours, the author of Church of the Wild. Mark used the preposition in to locate the particular place where John was baptizing people, in the River Jordan. And the Greek word used here is en, which means in, as in a location. The people were baptized in the river. Jesus, on the other hand, was baptized into the river. And the Greek word used here is eis. Into, a penetration of, a union with. And then a wild bird descended into Jesus. Usually it's translated as onto, but the Greek word again is eis, this word that means into, union with. And then Jesus is then sent into the wilderness, same word, eis, into, union with. The Greek preposition eis is not positional, it's relational. This distinction in the Greek is akin to the difference between being from a place and being of a place. It's the difference between I am from California and I love, care for, depend on, and I am an integral part of a particular place that is in California. It's the difference between hiking to a waterfall by hiking along a trail in the forest and consciously walking into a forest by investing time and attention to really get to know the waterfall season after season and establishing an authentic relationship. There is an unmediated presence of God that can only be experienced outside the human constructs of civilization when we enter into reverent relationship with the natural world. So Jesus was baptized in the same location as all the others, in the River Jordan. But the writers of the sacred story used this word, eis, into, to emphasize that the baptism of Jesus was different. It initiated him into relationship with the wild river, into union with. These are mystical words of deep connections, words that take seriously the call to love and belong to a place. Baptism into a river is a wilderness immersion that initiates an intimate, vulnerable union with the living world. What if we started thinking of baptism, indeed all our interactions with water, not as perfunctory ritual, but as intimate immersion into the living world? What if we saw each interaction with water as an invitation from capital N nature into the sacred? Jesus was baptized into the full wildness of the world, and we are invited there too, as Victoria Loreman says. No longer is this simply a baptismal commitment to your own private spiritual journey, or even the spiritual connection with those in your religious community. This is an immersion into the waterfall, into real relationship with the creatures of and the actual waters of one's baptism, and into a commitment toward the thriving of the whole creative and alive planet. Friends, I hope that this week, as you perform the water rituals of daily life, washing hands, cleansing our bodies, quenching our thirst, that we'll see each interaction with water as sacred. Allow yourself to feel immersed in the wild river that our water came from, and say yes to God's invitation to intimate connection with all of creation. Amen.